The 58th recommendation of the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Commission reads, in part, "We call upon the Pope to issue an apology to survivors, their families, and communities for the Roman Catholic Church's role in the spiritual, cultural, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children in Catholic-run residential schools within 1 year of issuing this report, and to be delivered by the Pope in Canada." 7 years later, that apology was given. With us now on how it's been received and what it means for the efforts towards reconciliation, we're joined here in studio by activist and artist Sarain Fox, playwright, author, and filmmaker Drew Hayden Taylor, and on the line from Ottawa, Father Peter Bisson, who has worked with Indigenous Catholics since 2009 and throughout the TRC process. Welcome all. Now, before we begin, Sarain and Drew, I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves from your community to our viewers and listeners, right?
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Bojo Wabananongo Quain Disnakaz Wabazation Dodam Anishinaabe Quain Dao Bachuanan Don Jabani Somadewian. So all of that is how I'm known, but I go by Sarain.
Anine, my name is Drew Hayden Taylor, and I'm from the Curve Lake First Nation, just north of Peterborough, First Nation number 35. Woohoo!
All right, well, thank you so much for being here. All right, so we'll start with impressions. Overall impressions, I want to start with
I don't do impressions.
None at all.
None at all.
Oh, I'm surprised, Drew.
Sarain, when we talk about the apology, what were your sort of impressions? You were there, of course, so.
Yeah, I don't want to undermine any of the feelings that many survivors had of the importance of this. For many, this was a pivotal moment that they needed to see in their lifetime. But for me, it didn't go far enough. It didn't break things down far enough. And furthermore, I think the consultation needed to make this meaningful. Prior consultation with Indigenous communities prior to this visit, it didn't happen. So we didn't see that. We didn't see that on the ground.
All right, we're going to get Peter on that as well. Your impressions?
Well, I was at the Edmonton, there were 4 events in Edmonton. I was at 2 of them. And I left full of mixed feelings. I was really glad that the Pope came, and I was quite touched by his words and his attitude. But at the same time, I found that many aspects of the organization around the visit really showed how the church, our church is still very colonial in our mentalities and presuppositions and blind spots. So I left full of mixed feelings. I was part of a group, Indigenous people, other Jesuits, and most of us left in a similar mood. So we've been talking about it since then, trying to process our feelings and what we might want to do next.
All right, and Drew.
Well, I think it's important to point out that as Canadians, we know apologies very well. We're the type of people who, when we bump into a desk, we apologize to the desk. Now, keeping that in mind, I think it's a very good first effort. I mean, we, as Indigenous people, we have a strong respect for our elders. And this was a very elderly man that flew halfway around the world in a private jet with an entourage to deliver an apology, and I respect and I honor that. But again, speaking as a Indigenous Canadian, we apologize to desks. So I don't know how authentic, how good, what the repercussions of this apology is. It's a good beginning, but there's got to be more to it in the end.
All right, let's talk about some other critics. Among the apology's harshest critics was Murray Sinclair, who chaired the TRC. The Globe and Mail reported Sinclair had said the Pope's words left a deep hole in recognizing the full role the Catholic Church played in operating residential schools by highlighting the actions of Christians, not the Church as an institution. Peter, I'll start with you on the criticism.
Yeah, I too was disappointed that the Pope didn't speak in terms of the corporate responsibility of the whole church instead of naming many Christians. I think what he said in Edmonton was stronger than what he said in Rome during his apology, but I think that was missing in the words. On the other hand, he said he was asked about this at a meeting in Quebec City, and he understood the point, and he said that when he speaks in the name of the church, when he speaks for the whole church. So he was trying to say that his presence made it a corporate responsibility. But in terms of the words that were used, I think I would agree with Murray Sinclair.
All right, Sarain, I see you nodding your head. I want to get your take on that as well, on the criticism there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I have to say that Murray Sinclair is an elder of mine and a big inspiration for the work that I do. And my Auntie Mary, who is a survivor, spent many years in the beginning of that TRC Truth and Reconciliation tour doing work to reach out to survivors and to hear their thoughts. And so I think he's fueled by hearing so much truth. He really speaks from a place of standing with those survivors. And I think we know from the papal bulls that when something is sent out from the Pope, it is an ordinance of the entire organization. And so it's interesting to hear that. And so in that way, it doesn't go far enough that he doesn't break it down. Sexual abuse, land. You can't just apologize for residential schools. The church needs to take responsibility for the role it had in discovery, which is the root of colonization. So I think when Murray says there's a deep hole that's been left, that hole that's there is the truth that is still unsaid.
Drew, let's not forget this is the Catholic Church. Not much changes over centuries. To what extent do you see the Pope's visit and apology as progress? You mentioned sort of a beginning, but...
Well, what I find interesting is like they're dribbling out the apologies, like just like crusts of bread. They did one when the delegation went to the Vatican a couple months ago. He did a kind of one here, and then on the famous flight back home, he mentioned the concept of genocide. It's like he's giving out little bits here and there to keep our hopes alive, and that yes, it will be coming. Here's something. Here's an appetizer. Here's a amuse-bouche before the main meal comes. So, you know, I'm hoping that he could have just torn off the Band-Aid all at once, dealt with it in one big thing, but it just seems to be dribbles from a dribble glass right now.
All right. I want to talk about the Day of the Apology. Sarain, you are known widely as one of two people, you were there with your cousin, who held up a banner during the Pope's apology. We have the photo. Tell us about the banner. Tell us about this moment.
You know, that was such an incredible moment for me in the fact that I'm standing there with my cousin in her very first action. And behind us, supporting us to go out there, is my Uncle Harvey, who has done so much work in advocacy and in the community. And that was a reaction to what happened the day before on the Plains of Abraham when the Pope arrived in Quebec City. So that moment is a reaction to, first of all, not even having the proper translations on the screen. I sat in an event where there were hundreds of survivors waiting for the Pope to show up. They were unaware that he wasn't going to be in the same space as they were, like he was in Edmonton. He was kept quite far away, and everything was on screens, jumbotrons. And for about the first 10 minutes, there were no translations at all. So none of the survivors had any idea of what was being said, and this was for them. You know, this wasn't for, you know, all of Canada. This was for the survivors. And so it felt like Indigenous people had no say, no presence at all there, and no impact on his apology. So in that moment, that was a reaction to that, to stand up in front of all of our elders, all of those survivors, and say, the young people are listening, and we're going to stand up for you, not just in apologies, but in our advocacy to remember the truth of all that's been done.
Father Peter, I want to bring you in on this because you were there, and I don't know if you caught that moment as well. That was not only was the apology a historic moment, but what Sarain did was also a historic moment there. I want to get your thoughts on there, and also help us break down, you know, the words "rescind the doctrine" and sort of what that sort of message was there.
Well, the Doctrine of Discovery is just to kind of summarize it, it's an idea in international law put out by Christian monarchs of Europe in the late 1400s, 1500s, to legitimize the colonization and conquest and evangelization of lands and peoples outside of Europe. It's based, at least formally, I think, in a number of papal decrees or papal bulls, but one in particular from 1493, where the Pope basically divided the globe, the planet, between Spain and Portugal. You take this half, you take that half. There's more to it than that, and one of the ideas is that if a land is not ruled by a Christian monarch, then and they resist becoming Christian, then they can take the land. And also, if the land, terra nullius is another part of the concept. If the land is unoccupied, which practically speaking meant if it's not being used for, constructively used for agriculture, then it can be taken also. So these ideas were used to legitimize conquest, colonization, as well as evangelization. The idea has been abrogated, criticized by subsequent popes, but it's still around, and obviously is part of the behavior of Canada, the United States, and many other countries.
Thank you, Peter, for that. Now, Sarain, we actually unfurled the banner itself, and I want to get, there is some actual additional writing on here as well. So can you break that down for us? What am I seeing right here?
Yeah, so this banner actually went outside the church after the service, and it was incredible how many survivors came and wanted to discuss it. They wanted to talk about it. And in that, I was actually very surprised how many of our own people have no idea about the doctrine. They have no idea how it affects their lives or how it affected the Indian Act and how we're governed and all of those things. But so many times these messages were left after those conversations, and it's because survivors wanted this to go to other places, to go to more apologies, other community events, and they wanted their family members' names and messages to go with it. So this one right in front of me, it says Mom, Uncle Larry. So these were survivors. It says the names and Millbrook First Nation, Nova Scotia. Messages like honor the treaties. And to me, this banner has become a living entity now because they've left their mark in this really important moment. So I was quite honored that that happened.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Now, I do have one question as well. Mm-hmm. That banner did not face the Pope. It faced the crowd.
That's right.
Tell me the decision behind that.
Well, he didn't translate for us. No, but it was for the people. Let's not pretend I work in media. Mm-hmm. So I also knew it would be much more profound if the world saw the Pope and the messaging was with him behind it. And so that was really important. And I always want to flag this. I'm a spiritual person. I was raised in my faith. I'm a Medewan. That's my personal faith. And in that moment, in that church, it wasn't a moment of resistance. I wanted survivors who do honor that faith to feel that we were also respecting that moment. And we've never had real nation-to-nation relationships. And I felt as though we were a spiritual group going to represent and honor another spiritual group with this messaging before the service. We were very conscious not to interrupt. I don't know much about the church, but from what I understood, that service there. So we needed it to happen right when he arrived.
All right, Drew, Peter sort of explained the Doctrine of Discovery. What would that do if the doctrine was indeed rescinded?
Well, I think it would just be an acknowledgement of the importance of Canada's, I shouldn't say Canada's Indigenous people, because that's so possessive, the Indigenous people of Canada, that we existed here at the time of contact, and the importance we have in living on this land, being a part of the land, and in a understandable way, we helped those early explorers survive. They would not have survived without us. So it seems so horrible to be just brushed aside, you know. And this is also tied into the whole terra nullius concept. All these decisions made regarding the history and the future of Indigenous people in a far-off land by people who didn't even know anything about us. It's just sort of the complete dismissal of the importance of Indigenous people in the founding of this land.
Mm-hmm. Peter, I want to come to you. Has the doctrine been rescinded in some way? And on top of that, I am curious, does the Pope actually have the power to rescind the doctrine? Well,
to the latter question, yes. It wouldn't have much impact on the laws of countries, but yes. And in 1537, another pope wrote a papal bull also that in effect abrogated the earlier one because he was promoting Indigenous rights and rights to freedom, property, being treated respectfully and not to be enslaved or conquered. And there was a systematization of Catholic law in 1983, and one of the items, or they're called canons, in it abrogated all previous laws. Nevertheless, a number of Indigenous intellectuals in Canada and the US, Australia, and New Zealand recognize that those things have been done, but feel that somehow it's still on the books, as it were, in Catholic law. I'm not an expert in law, Catholic or otherwise, but I certainly respect the opinion of these scholars who are quite sophisticated interpreters of documents. So that's where that's kind of the rub right now, and what's at stake is the relationship to land and relationship to Indigenous people, and I think anyway, and how right relations can't go forward without the land.
Sarain, I want to come to you. I think I know this answer, but how does the Pope's apology measure up to the TRC's call for an apology? It seems like perhaps maybe two different things.
Entirely two different things. In fact, I would have loved to see a private meeting between Murray Sinclair and the Pope. I think that these scholars that we're speaking about, they are the ones that need to also be in the room. I was looking for a lot more meaningful interaction, whether it was in public or behind closed doors with the Pope. So these kind of meaningful conversations could happen. Those calls to action are barely being taken up by our country. The calls to action also largely leave out land. And I think land is a huge concept here that we need to talk about. We are still the ones with the burden of proving title often. And so even though there may have been amendments or parts of the doctrine that were rescinded, our laws, the same laws that govern us in Canada, are still influenced and are formulated on those principles. And that has not changed. So.
Let's follow up on that. Many Indigenous activists believe that land should be at the forefront of reconciliation. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, this is my personal comment. I don't know what reconciliation is. I've often referred to it as a Rorschach. It means different things to different people. And I know a lot of people are saying it cannot begin without the returning of the land, or at least some sort of acknowledgement of land taken. I'm generally a very optimistic person, but I find I have my doubts that all the land will ever be returned to Indigenous use. But I've done stories on, for sake of the argument, Sable Beach and Saugeen up on Georgian Bay. They're in dispute over a chunk of land that people are living on. And I remember talking with the chief of Saugeen about what would happen if they got possession of that land. And he said, absolutely nothing would change. We would not kick anybody off. It's just going to be a change of who they pay rent to. Right? It's not, they're not trying to get rid of anybody, take the land back, or open a bannock factory or anything like that. They just want acknowledgement that is their land, and they'll work something out. So I'm hoping that will be part of the discussion at some point.
And part of that discussion we talk is the apology is land, is another thing, is compensation. And Peter, I want to talk to you. Does the church intend to follow up with actual financial compensation to go with the apology?
Well, there's the recent commitment to raise 30 million, and there's been so much for especially for healing. There's been so much pressure within the church from people in the pews on the bishops to fulfill this delayed promise, especially after Kamloops, that I think, well, there's certainly a lot of pressure within the church to take this seriously. So I think they're going to do it. I certainly hope they're going to do it. But the church was supposed to do this around 2015. Yeah. So it's been put off, and that has been scandalous.
So I'm going to come to you on that. Isn't that what the apology should lead to, actual financial compensation?
Yeah, it should lead to actual financial compensation while survivors are still alive to make use of that. We're going to have a whole new set of questions when we're talking about, 10, even 20 years from now, when most of the survivors are not with us. What does that look like for their families? Are we going to make sure that all of the descendants are able to access those same funds? But furthermore, what about the storehold of artifacts, the largest collection of Indigenous artifacts in the world that is at the Vatican? What is the monetary value behind that? And when will those conversations happen? When will I see my scrolls, the scrolls that my ancestors wrote on, my history, the very history that proves that Indigenous people were sophisticated, civilized, and incredibly smart spiritual humans when settlers first arrived?
Peter, I want to come to you. You've worked with Indigenous Catholics for many years. To what extent has the apology helped the survivors along their healing journey?
Well, it's quite recent. It was only a couple of weeks ago. But from what I'm hearing, many Indigenous Catholics have experienced a degree of healing just by hearing the words of the Pope and seeing him actually come here to do that. But people are still processing it. I'm still processing it. It's going to take some time to figure out what happened and what it means and what it should mean going forward.
Drew, what would you like to see happen next?
Well, everything that we've basically discussed. Like I talk about myself as I'm never been to a residential school. I'm not Catholic, but imagine the Catholic Church is a big pond and Native people are a rock that was thrown into that residential school and the water went up. And I think I can safely say all Native people in Canada have gotten wet, been splashed, been affected by the residential school situation, even though we may not have gone to it. I went to a day school. And the people who are true survivors and the people like me who have been, I'm using the metaphor, been splashed, we need that acknowledgement. We need to know that the pain that we went through has been understood, been accepted, and is being compensated, is being acknowledged. And apologies are great, but healing requires a bit more, a lot more.
Peter, I want to come to you as well with the same question. What would you like to see happen next?
I'll answer in two parts. The last day of the Pope's visit, the Catholic bishops of Canada issued a letter with 5 items that they wanted to follow up on, and one of them was the artifacts in the Vatican. But I think I agree that apology, while it's an important step, a milestone even maybe, it is not enough. The relationships underneath that led to colonization, the power imbalance, those need to be transformed. And without some kind of fundamental transformation in our relationships and the relationship of power between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, including in the Church, that's what's going to make apology meaningful. So working towards right relations. What that looks like, I don't know, but hopefully we'll work it out together. But the transformed relations underneath the apology, that has to be, that's what's going to make the apology real.
Sorry?
I think it's important to point out that there were many people who came to witness this apology who were not Indigenous. They were faith keepers. And it's important right now that Indigenous people and all faith keepers and all spiritual people around the world take notice. And all of the harm that was done by the mistreatment and the miseducation and the lies that have been told about our people, those same organizations, they need to right those truths. We need advocacy for Indigenous people to lead the way by those same organizations. Language back, land back, ceremony back, nation-to-nation relationship back, sovereignty back. What I want for the future is Indigenous young people to have a real place in this country where they are valued and seen for the contributions they made, but they also have a real hand in the power of politics of this country. That's what the Catholic Church took away from us, and that's what we deserve back.
We have about a couple minutes left, and I do want to ask both you and Peter one question. Can the perpetrator be part of the solution?
I think the perpetrator must always be a part of what happens. I don't know if that means the solution, but I do think that there are wrongs that are crimes here that need to be punished. And I think by punishing the people whose hands are dirty, they become a part of the solution.
Peter, you got the last word on this one. Can the perpetrator be part of the solution?
If the goal is reconciliation, then I think that has to be the case. Yeah, and that's for healing for all sides.
All right,
For
Drew.
the abusers of power and the victims of abuse of power.
Oh, it's a hard one.
That's
It's a hard question.
one.
That's a hard
it is a
question.
hard
It's a hard one.
Yeah.
Drew, do you want to?
Well, a particular belief amongst many Indigenous cultures is the concept of maintaining a harmony of existence. If you damage that harmony, it's your responsibility to go back and repair it. Punishment in the Western European corporal sense of throwing somebody in jail is not the answer according to many spiritual beliefs. If you hurt somebody, you have to go heal them. If you break something, you have to repair it. If you take something, you have to put something back. That is a primary belief in many Indigenous cultures, and I think that needs to be applied to this whole discussion.
Drew, thank you for that reminder. I actually think it's so important. I think even as an activist, I can get so gung-ho, and it's a place that we all go to. But thank you for the reminder of restorative justice. That's what you just brought up, and that's our true way, so thank you. Perhaps that's what restorative justice really means, and it is hardest to execute when it is hard.
Yes.
It is.
Language.
Sarain, Drew, Peter, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experiences and your thoughts.
It's a pleasure.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.